There is a particular kind of tiredness that settles into a person after a long shift, one that lives not just in the muscles but somewhere deeper, in the quiet spaces behind the eyes, in the slow, careful way a person moves when every ounce of urgency has finally been spent. Hannah Reyes knew that tiredness intimately. She had just finished 18 hours at a small regional hospital following a mass casualty event, and she was flying home now, finally, to see her mother for the first time in nearly a year. She was 34 years old, a trauma nurse, though the small compass tattoo on her forearm, inked with a set of Roman numerals beneath it, told a story that had nothing to do with hospitals at all, and everything to do with a different chapter of her life, one she rarely spoke about, one she carried quietly, the way so many people carry the truest parts of themselves. She had used hard-earned points to upgrade herself to first class that day, a rare indulgence after months of overtime shifts and skipped vacations. And as she settled into her window seat, still dressed in her scrubs, still smelling faintly of hospital antiseptic, she allowed herself, for just a moment, to close her eyes and breathe. She did not yet know that this quiet, ordinary flight was about to become one of the more difficult afternoons of her year, not because of turbulence or delay, but because of the particular cruelty that sometimes comes from people who have never learned to look past the surface of another person's life. The couple seated beside her introduced themselves within minutes of boarding. Gerald and Diane Ashford, a well-dressed pair in their late 50s, the kind of travelers who wore their comfort the way some people wear cologne, a little too liberally, applied without much thought to who else might notice. Gerald glanced over at Hannah's scrubs with an expression that shifted, subtly but unmistakably, from curiosity to distaste. "First class seems like an unusual choice for someone in your line of work," he said, not quite unkindly, but not kindly either in the particular tone of a man accustomed to assuming he understood at a glance exactly who belonged where. "I used some points," Hannah said simply, closing her eyes again, hoping the conversation might end there. It did not. "People in this section," Gerald continued, glancing meaningfully at his wife, "don't typically live paycheck to paycheck, you understand. It's not personal. It's just, well, there's a certain standard." Hannah opened her eyes slowly, looking at him with the calm, steady patience of someone who has spent a career absorbing far worse than casual condescension from strangers. "I understand completely," she said, her voice even without a trace of anger in it. "I'm not here to bother anyone. I just need some rest." Diane Ashford, glancing at Hannah's tired eyes and rumpled scrubs, offered a thin, tight smile that did not reach her eyes at all. "It must be exhausting work," she said, in the particular tone people use when they mean the opposite of what their words suggest. "I'm sure it pays terribly." Hannah had learned, across years of both nursing and an earlier chapter of her life she rarely discussed, that the wisest response to casual cruelty was very often silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the quieter, sturdier silence of someone who understood, deep in her bones, that she did not need a stranger's approval to know her own worth. Her grandmother, a farmer's wife from rural Nebraska, had taught her that lesson long before Hannah had ever worn a uniform of any kind. Some people measure worth by what they can see on the outside. Her grandmother used to say, while shelling peas on the back porch during long summer evenings, "You measure it by what you carry inside, and let the rest of the world catch up whenever it's ready to." So Hannah simply closed her eyes again, letting the Ashfords' comments settle and pass, the way weather passes without taking root in her. But Gerald, perhaps emboldened by her silence, mistaking her calm for something closer to shame, continued a little longer than perhaps he intended. "I only mention it," he said to his wife, though loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear, "because I do think airlines ought to consider some kind of dress code for premium cabins. It's not about money exactly. It's about maintaining a certain atmosphere." A young flight attendant nearby, overhearing the exchange, glanced uncomfortably toward Hannah, clearly uncertain whether to intervene. Several passengers in the surrounding rows shifted in their seats, the particular discomfort of witnesses who sense unkindness unfolding, but are unsure whether stepping in is their place. It was in that charged, uncomfortable moment that a tall, silver-haired man in the formal uniform of a Marine Corps General made his way slowly, down the aisle from the rear of the plane, his eyes sweeping the cabin with the quiet, watchful authority of someone long accustomed to reading a room in a single glance. His gaze landed on Hannah's forearm, on the small compass tattoo visible beneath her rolled sleeve, and he stopped walking entirely. "Corporal Reyes," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hushed cabin, a note of genuine astonishment beneath its careful control. Hannah's eyes opened, and something in her tired, guarded expression shifted immediately into recognition, followed swiftly by something like quiet emotion. "General Whitfield," she said softly, "I didn't expect to see you again. Not like this." The general, Marcus Whitfield, a decorated three-star general with over 30 years of distinguished service, studied her for a long moment, his eyes moving from her face to the tattoo on her arm and back again, before he did something that made the entire cabin fall utterly silent. He came to attention right there in the narrow aisle of the first-class cabin and offered her a slow, deliberate, and unmistakably respectful salute. The Ashfords and every other passenger within view watched in stunned silence as a decorated three-star general stood at attention before a woman in rumpled hospital scrubs, a woman they had only moments earlier suggested did not belong among them. "Sir," Hannah said quietly, "you don't need to do that. Not anymore. That part of my life ended a long time ago. Some debts don't have an expiration date." "Corporal," Whitfield said, lowering his salute but remaining standing, unwilling, it seemed, to simply pass by without acknowledging what he had recognized. "Not the ones that matter." Gerald Ashford, his earlier confidence visibly draining from his face, glanced between the general and the tired young woman beside him, with an expression of dawning, uncomfortable confusion. I'm sorry. Is there something we should know here?" Whitfield turned to him, his expression not unkind, but carrying the particular weight of a man who had spent decades learning exactly how much authority his simple presence commanded. "This young woman," he said, "served 3 tours as a combat medic with the 2nd Marine Division. That tattoo she's wearing, the compass, and the numerals beneath it is marks, the date and unit designation of an operation in which she personally carried 4 wounded Marines to safety under sustained enemy fire, at grave risk to her own life, after the medevac helicopter assigned to extract them was disabled." He paused, letting the words settle fully into the stunned quiet of the cabin. "One of those 4 Marines was my own son." The cabin had gone entirely silent now, save for the low hum of the plane's engines, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene with the particular stillness that settles over people witnessing something they will remember for a very long time. She held a defensive position alone for nearly 40 minutes, Whitfield continued, keeping 4 wounded men alive and providing suppressing fire until a secondary extraction team could reach them. My son came home because of what she did that day. He has 2 children now, a wife, an entire life he would never have had, were it not for Corporal Reyes's actions on a hillside on the other side of the world. Diane Ashford, who moments earlier had offered Hannah a thin, condescending smile, now sat frozen, her hand pressed lightly to her mouth, her earlier certainty about who deserved to sit where visibly, thoroughly unraveling. "I didn't know," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "I had no idea." "Most people don't," Whitfield said, not unkindly, though there was a firmness beneath his words that left no room for misunderstanding. "That's rather the point of quiet service, isn't it? The people who give the most rarely announce it. They simply do the work and go on with their lives afterward, asking nothing in return." Hannah, watching the exchange with the same calm steadiness that had carried her through both a combat deployment and 18 straight hours of trauma, nursing that very same day, finally spoke. "General, please," she said gently. "I appreciate what you're saying, truly, but I'd rather not make a scene of it. That's not why I mentioned my seat, and it's certainly not why I'm here today." "I understand," Whitfield said, his voice softening, "but I think there's value sometimes in letting the truth stand up when it's needed, even if the person carrying it would rather stay quiet." He turned back to Gerald and Diane Ashford. "I don't say any of this to embarrass you. I say it because I think it's worth remembering, all of us, myself included, that the person beside us on a flight, in rumpled scrubs after an 18-hour shift, might be carrying a history far larger than anything visible on the surface. A little humility goes a long way in this life. It's a lesson I'm still learning myself, even after 30 years of service. Gerald Ashford, his earlier bluster entirely gone now, looked at Hannah with an expression of genuine, humbled remorse. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "A real one. I judged you the moment I saw you, and I was wrong to do it. I'm ashamed of what I said." "It's all right," Hannah said, and there was no bitterness in her voice at all, only the quiet, settled peace of a woman who had long ago made her peace with being underestimated. "People make assumptions. It happens more often than you'd think. I've learned not to carry other people's misunderstanding as my own burden." General Whitfield remained standing beside her seat a while longer, and in time, once the initial shock of the moment had settled in the surrounding, passengers had returned gradually to their own quiet conversations. He took the empty seat across the aisle and spoke with Hannah in a softer, more private voice. "How have you been, really?" he asked. "Since you got out?" "Good, mostly," Hannah said. "I went into trauma nursing. Felt like the natural next step. Somehow, still helping people through their worst moments, just without the uniform." She glanced down at her scrubs, a faint, tired smile crossing her face. "Some days it feels like the same work, just quieter." "Is it strange?" Whitfield asked. "Going from that kind of intensity to civilian medicine?" "Sometimes," Hannah admitted. "But my grandmother used to tell me that the work itself doesn't change as much as we think it does, that helping someone survive their worst day, whether it's on a hillside overseas or in a hospital bed back home, comes from the exact same place in a person. I've found that to be true mostly. The circumstances change. The purpose doesn't." Whitfield nodded slowly, something reflective passing across his weathered face. "My son still talks about you, you know. Every year, on the anniversary of that day, he calls to tell me he's grateful to be alive. He always asks if I've heard anything about the medic who got them out. I never had an answer for him until today." "Please tell him I'm glad he's doing well," Hannah said softly. "Truly, that's all I ever hoped for. Watching those helicopters finally arrive." "I'll do better than tell him," Whitfield said. "I'll give him your information if you're willing. I think he'd like the chance to thank you properly after all these years." Hannah considered this for a moment, then nodded. "I'd like that too." The remainder of the flight passed quietly, the earlier tension in the cabin gradually dissolving into something softer, more reflective. Diane Ashford, unable to fully shake her earlier embarrassment, eventually leaned over toward Hannah with a small, genuine smile. "I don't suppose you'd let an old woman buy you a drink?" "By way of apology," she said. "I really am sorry. Gerald and we've gotten comfortable in our own little world, I think. It's easy to forget how much you don't know about the people around you. When you stop asking, that's all right," Hannah said and meant it. "We all have moments we'd take back if we could. What matters is what we do afterward." "You're very gracious," Diane said. "More gracious than I probably deserve given how I spoke to you earlier." "My grandmother used to say holding on to anger is like carrying a hot coal, waiting for the chance to throw it at someone else," Hannah said, smiling faintly. "It only burns the person holding on to it. I'd rather just set it down and enjoy the rest of the flight." Somewhere over the Midwest, as the plane began its slow, steady descent through a bank of soft evening clouds, General Whitfield rose to return to his own seat, pausing once more beside Hannah before he did. "I meant what I said earlier," he told her, "about debts without an expiration date. What you did that day changed the whole shape of my family's life, in ways I'll never be able to fully repay. But I want you to know, the Marine Corps doesn't forget people like you. Corporal Reyes, whatever life you build from here, however quiet or ordinary it looks from the outside, know that there are people out there who remember exactly what you're capable of, and who are deeply, permanently grateful for it." Hannah felt her eyes fill just slightly, with an emotion she rarely allowed herself to show in public. "Thank you, General. That means more than you know." "No," Whitfield said gently. "Thank you. For then and for now. Some people spend a lifetime looking for a single moment of real courage. You've already given the world several, and you're still finding new ways to give more, one patient at a time. That's a rare and remarkable thing." When the plane finally landed and the passengers began filing off, Gerald Ashford found Hannah near the gate. waiting quietly for her connecting flight, and extended his hand. "I wanted to say one more time how sorry I am," he said. "You've given me a great deal to think about today. More than I expected from a simple flight home." Hannah shook his hand warmly. "We all judge too quickly sometimes," she said. "The important thing is being willing to learn better. That's all any of us can really do." "I hope your mother knows how lucky she is," Gerald said, "to have a daughter like you." "I hope so too," Hannah said softly, thinking of the quiet farmhouse waiting for her at the end of her journey, of her mother's careful, worried eyes, of all the ordinary Sunday dinners still ahead of them both, now that Hannah had finally safely come home. There is a particular kind of wisdom that comes only from having lived through hardship. Most people never see, and having learned gradually that the truest measure of a life is never found in the seat a person occupies, or the clothes they wear, or the assumptions strangers make in passing. Hannah Reyes had learned that lesson on a hillside far from home, in the desperate 40 minutes that had shaped the whole rest of her life, and she carried it forward quietly, faithfully in every patient she treated, every stranger she forgave, every ordinary day she chose deliberately not to let old bitterness take root. She flew home to her mother that evening, the small compass tattoo on her arm hidden once more beneath her sleeve, carrying with her not anger at the Ashfords' earlier cruelty, but something gentler, something closer to quiet gratitude, for a life spared on a distant hillside, for a general's unexpected recognition, for the reminder, offered unexpectedly on an ordinary flight home, that the truest kind of respect is never about where a person sits, but about who they choose to become, one difficult, faithful day at a time. Her grandmother, she thought, watching the last golden light of evening spread across the clouds outside her window, would have been proud of how she'd handled it all. The unkindness, the recognition, the quiet grace of letting go of what didn't need to be carried any further. Decide to help. Her grandmother's voice echoed gently in her memory. One final time, and your hands will always find their way back to it, no matter how far you've traveled or how long the road home has been. And somewhere over the quiet fields of the Midwest, Hannah Reyes closed her eyes at last and let herself simply rest.